Welcome. It's fantastic to see you all here tonight. My name's Athena Donald, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the master. I'm a physicist. I'm not really an engineer, so I'm just sneaking in. We're here to celebrate International Women's Day, the legacy, and I am just, I think the buzz out there was amazing. So clearly, Charlotte, who set this thing up, has done a great job. And I think we should also thank TTP for sponsoring it, because and I think I'm also particularly pleased to see how many men there are here, actually, because sometimes events celebrating women turn out to be women only, which is kind of sad, because there is no doubt that things don't happen unless we work together. So it's lovely to see people coming back right from the earliest days. 1972, when the college went mixed, we have at least one person from 1972. And since then, we have had a proud tradition of women in engineering here. There was perhaps a dip, but it is great that this current first year we have 6 students, which I think is the largest number ever. It may not sound like very many, but it is great progress. And we still need to work at making sure young girls understand that STEM subjects, and engineering in particular, are appropriate for them. There is still work to be done. And personally, I blame the media, because I think they give this image that girls have to be only dressed in pink and not get dirty and not do things that involve them taking things to pieces and stuff. And I think that does a disservice to girls, it does a disservice to boys. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done in making sure that we have equity for everything. I mean, if I'm talking to a different audience, I'd say, well, it bothers me that 80% of the undergraduates in the vet school are women, because I think that's a bad thing too. It cuts both ways. Anyhow, we're here tonight to hear from some of the alumni and people who are practicing engineers about, well, I guess we're talking about what life is like. I don't actually know what you're going to talk about. What life is like. You know. And here are some wonderful role models. There are more in the audience, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy and celebrate.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. It's good to see such a big turnout as well at an event like this. So I'm Charlotte, I'm a third year undergraduate, and then this is Catherine, who's a PhD student, and she's going to be leading this discussion tonight. I'd like to say a quick thank you to everyone that's made the event possible. So we've got Tim, Elizabeth, Fran, Malcolm, our sponsors from TTP, and then of course our wonderful panellists. I'll quickly introduce our panellists, everyone. So starting from this end, we've got Janet Fisher, who started at Churchill, and in her first year, it was only the 3rd year that women had ever been admitted to Churchill. So as a result, there were only 3 female engineers in college and 10 in the whole university. She then worked at BP Chemicals as a mechanical engineer, and she was their first ever female engineer employee. Next, she moved to Canada and worked at Imperial Oil as a maintenance engineer. And now she's retired and does work with at-risk youth. Then next, we've got Anne Miller, who's had a long career as an inventor and innovator. After graduating, she became an R&D engineer and has developed a wide range of products and processes, including products for energy efficiency, healthcare. And then she worked in innovation consultancy, and she set up her own company in 2000. She continues to provide training and mentoring on creativity and innovation to leaders, board members and startups. She writes extensively and is actually the author of her book, How to Get Your Ideas Adopted and Change the World, which is so impressive. And then next we've got Hayley Richard-Jones. She worked at Shell for 12 years, and in her time there, she worked in engineering, business, strategy and economics, and it took her from mainland Europe, Africa and Asia. After she had her 2 sons, she became frustrated by the lack of STEM engagement in primary schools. So she's set up some STEM enrichment clubs and encouraged children to build and race their own green power electric cars. And she's actually managed to fundraise £500,000 for green power. in the last 3 years and is now acting as the interim CEO for them, which is very impressive. And then on the end, we've got Rebecca Wray, who is a human factors consultant with a background in product design engineering from TTP. She's got a keen interest in understanding how users interact with devices and how to influence novel design to reduce use error. In particular, at the moment, she's investigating how novel technologies and digital health can be integrated into drug delivery devices to improve outcomes. Before she joined TTP, she worked in both the medical and automotive industries at GSK and Volvo Cars. So I'll let the panel get started.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I, for one, feel quite embarrassed by the sort of richness of experience around it. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have a little bit of a chat. We're going to talk through how people get started in engineering, what the sort of pivotal points in careers have been, and get a chance to reflect on how engineering work is playing out for women and what we think, you know, some of the trends for the future might be. But it's not about what I think might be interesting. So after probably around about 7:10 or so, depending on how interesting things are getting, I would like to make sure we open the floor so that you can ask the questions that you really want to know. Sounds sensible? Everybody happy? Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about getting started, because I think Dame Matheny alluded to this at the beginning when you were saying that we're not great at encouraging women in STEM. What set you off into engineering? What was it like sort of coming through undergraduate and getting your first steps in your career going? If we can start with you.
1967, I was one of the last people who ever took the 11 plus in Sheffield. They abolished it. And I got to Sheffield Girls High School. And the next year, when they abolished the 11 plus, every other school in Sheffield went co-ed, but Sheffield Girls High School stayed as Sheffield Girls High School, and they had a full-blown math, physics, chemistry department. So they educated us in that, and there was no competition to be educated in it either. So it never occurred to me not to do science. My father was actually a lecturer in engineering at Sheffield University, and I don't recall him ever saying he ever had any women in his classes, but he certainly said, yeah, do it. And that's probably how I got started. And so in my last sixth form, I applied, various universities, including Cambridge, and got the offer, and found out very early on you have to do a certain type of workshop training to complete your degree. You wouldn't get your degree unless you'd done so many weeks or months of workshop training. I don't know if that still applies or not. So I went knocking on the door, and because this was the 70s, the steel industry was still alive and well in Britain. So I went knocking on the door of around Sheffield and ended up at River Don Works and British Steel, spending the summer between high school and university, doing lathe work, milling, fitting and everything. Did basically 3 months workshop training as part of the engineering training programme that they had back then. So it was me, I think 2 male graduates, 16-year-old school leavers, and I think a couple of guys on government retraining schemes, and who used to have to put their hair up in a net or so on, spending the summer. And I got through that, so it never occurred to me I couldn't be an engineer after having spent 3 months at British Steel training workshop. And of the 16-year-old leavers, you could differentiate them. They all had skinhead hairstyle, we're talking 1974. They all had their Doc Martens. Half of them wore red and white and half of them wore blue and white, because half supported Sheffield United and the other half supported Sheffield Wednesday. But yours truly here actually learnt an awful lot about getting along in industry, because I actually was quite good at operating a lathe, and I would finish my project and soon learnt that you don't sit around reading books in front of all these school leavers. I had an absolutely wonderful training workshop foreman who was probably one of the best mentors I've ever had in my life. So that's my pre-Churchill experience that kicked me off into getting into engineering.
Did you also have to spend time in the workshops?
Oh yes, there was a lovely chap called Mr. Yields at Churchill who helped me get some workshop experience. But I got a very, very specific moment in which I decided I wanted to be an engineer. Or more specifically, I decided I wanted to be a professional inventor and technical consultant. And it was basically, I was 16. I guess then I probably hadn't quite done, maybe I was just starting A-level, something like that. And my best friend at school and I were working out, well, what are we going to do? And I was really interested in science. But I was also really interested in art. And my art teacher was trying to make me go to art school, and my physics teacher was trying to make me go to, study physics, and the maths teacher wanted me to do maths. And I wanted something that sort of kind of combined them. And then my friend Hilary said, I think you need to go and talk to Dad. And her dad was a chap called Professor Glegg. Some of you may know of Professor Glegg, who lectured here at the engineering department. He was the archetypal mad inventor. He was a sort of Heinz Wolff type. And he used to get, when I was an engineering student, I don't know if it was the same when you were, he used to give these 9 o'clock Monday morning lectures. Basically, he just burbled on about exciting things and projects that he'd been doing. And they were packed at 9 o'clock Monday morning, which says how good he was. So anyhow, age 16, he shows me around the department, tells me about his career, inventing stuff, and I think that's what I want to do. It combines creativity and it combines my interest in science. And I find it weird when I look back now, it never occurred to me to think, what would it be like being a rather shy teenager embarking on a career in a very male-dominated industry? It never occurred to me. And I think that's really quite weird as to why it didn't. And for many women, they would have thought of that. It's an obvious question to ask. And it might have put them off. But then for me, I did some workshop experience. Some work experience. So I spent 6 months up in Newcastle on Tyne, working for CA Parsons, who make turbo generators for the power stations. I have absolutely no contact with had no contact with the North East before. It's Mr. Yields, got me the opportunity. They wanted to put me in a staff department because I was a woman, and what might happen if you're in the works. But I knew I needed shop floor experience, so I said, well, how about I go in this staff department for the second half? But in the half department, I want to be in a design office and doing things like that. So I had half the time. I had 3 months in a design office, and there was one calculator which I, as a student, didn't get to use because they were exciting things. And then I did. They said, right, now you've got to go into the mathematical services department. Oh God, because there was one big mainframe computer down in the basement. And so I said, well, but I need to get some shop floor experience. I said, okay. You're a woman, so you can't go on the graduate training scheme, which is what we normally put you on, because that would involve working in the foundry, and women aren't allowed in the foundry. But we'll put you in this staff department, which does tests on the shop floor. So I had lovely 6 weeks in this staff department, working on the shop floor, clambering over these big turbo generators, both in the works and down at Drax and Ferry Bridge and places, putting on sensors and things. And I vividly remember walking into this works. I mean, this is, big, old, classic engineering. And as I walked down this corridor into the works, I should say, by the way, it was me and 3,000 blokes. I saw all these locker doors flitter shut like leaves in the breeze, because those were the days when above my desk was a Playboy calendar, a woman wearing a piston rings and not much else. And inside every of these locker doors there was a girly picture. And as they saw, to their horror, a woman walking into the works, those locker doors all shut, because they were embarrassed. And wild rumours apparently went round the works about why this woman was there. And apparently the firm favourite was that I was Charlie Parsons' granddaughter, which was news to my parents, actually.
In many ways. I know this is a subject you feel really passionately about because you've been trying to get into schools. How's it been for you?
I think, much like Janet and Anne, it never occurred to me not to be an engineer. I'm the eldest daughter, the only daughter, and I have 2 younger brothers, and my parents are farmers. So if somebody was needed to hold a spanner, fix the thing, fix this, it was the oldest, and that was me. So, and nobody said, no, you can't do that anymore because now your brother's big enough. We just carried on. And I became fascinated by aeroplanes. So I was always going to be an engineer. And I was fortunate enough to be sponsored by Rolls-Royce. So before I came to Churchill, I spent a year in Derby in Rolls-Royce doing all the, learning how to use a lathe, doing all the, working on the shop floor. And I have to say, in retrospect, looking back, Rolls-Royce were unbelievably even-handed at the time. I mean, it was 1989, so you would hope they would be. But there was never any, well, you're not allowed on the shop floor, you're not allowed to do this. We were treated, very, very much just as other people. But I was reminded of, after I came to Churchill, I did a postgraduate in manufacturing here at Cambridge. And we went to the TVR factory in Blackpool, which was wallpapered with page 3. But there was nobody was embarrassed. There was no flicking of locker doors. Or the men were like, oh, well, this is how it is. You've got to accept it. Or don't come in. There was no embarrassing, and so all the girls were like, I don't know where to look. I don't, what do we do? Do we go and scroll on them? Do we ignore them? But they weren't embarrassed at all, and I think that culture, I hope that culture has changed quite a lot since then. Certainly, well, TVR doesn't exist, unfortunately. So maybe it was the page, maybe it was the page things.
Their mind wasn't on the job.
And how about you? How did you get started?
So I think my similar is quite similar to Anne's, where I have a love for maths, specifically science as well. Maths, I love maths, and also the creativity. But I guess my path wasn't so obvious in the beginning, so I didn't always know I wanted to be an engineer. So I wanted to be a musician. So I did my work experience with the BBC. I did recording with Van Morrison's band, and I thought, this is what I want to do. But then I realised that my love for music was more what I wanted to do in my free time and keep it something that I enjoyed and not to be my career. So I started frantically looking at everything else that I could do, pharmacy, medicine, everything. And the last thing that I did was I went to Wrightbus, the manufacturer of the new buses for London. And I went there and I realised how amazing it was that they could change this page of a drawing of a bus, and then we would walk along, and then there would be lines and lines of buses from just starting from nothing and then gradually growing along these manufacturing lines. And that's what started making me think more about engineering. And I did work experience in other places as well to really figure out if that's what I wanted. And that's sort of what led me down that path. But I was kind of the same. I'm a twin. I have a twin brother, and we're very competitive. So when we were growing up, when my dad said, "Oh, can you help me fix the car?" we'd both go out and be helping him fix the brake pads, and I was trying to show him that I was better than him. And there was never any. My parents were always, both of us had to chip in the same way. So I never really challenged the fact that I was a woman going into engineering.
One of the things you've just touched on there is just the variety and the scope of what's been going on. And I think talking to you, all of you have had these careers that have made changes, there have been points of inflection. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of those early points that happen, the first time you have to lead a team on your own, those sorts of things. Do you want to say a little bit about it? I know you moved abroad and all sorts of things.
Yes, so after I left Shell and left postgrad, I joined Shell and I worked abroad for many years, moving around the world. I started out in engineering, designing gas compression facilities in Nigeria. And then I moved to Holland and to Asia and then back to West Africa and Gabon. And along the way, I moved from the sort of pure technical role into more sort of management, planning, strategy, more about what are the right decisions to make in this instance. Shell's obviously a very big company and it has many, many choices. And I suppose I became very interested in why make choice A rather than choice B and how are we going to decide between that. So that's how I did it. And so over time, I never sort of led in terms of managing lots of people, but when I finished in Gabon, we were managing, I don't know how many £100 million worth of spend on drilling rigs, because it's quite an expensive industry, the oil industry. Every piece of steel costs a lot of money. So we were managing drilling rigs, deciding where to put them, and yeah, I'm still interested in choices and why people make the choices that they do. And I suppose my message would be is everybody's going to have choices. You don't have to think, I don't think of as your career as being quite linear. You know, you start here and then you get to a path in the road and so you decide which way you want to go. And just because you've set off here doesn't mean you have to end up over there. And at each point you sort of make a decision and you use the skills that you've gained in all those previous jobs to inform and to go in your next job. Does that make sense?
I think that's been your experience too, then.
Yeah,
isn't it?
so for me. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, I've got a bit. My voice is likely to do a bit of a Theresa May, but I'm not relying on Philip Hammond to give me my off.
Very wise.
Yeah. So for me, there've been some inflections, and I've led. I mean, the maximum number of people I led in a team was I think 16 people. But you know, like you, sometimes it's. I mean, in my case, it's sometimes a £1 million project thereabouts. But there've been some people might look at the various sort of zigzags in my career and think, well, that's a bit weird and random. Does this woman know where she's going? Has she got a strategy? You know, and the answer is no, I didn't have a strategy. But the direction I've gone in, they've always been true to my heart. And part of my advice would be, you know, go to where your passion is, because then even if things look like a zigzag to everybody else, because it's coherent and genuine to you, there will be an inner logic to it which will become clear and will suit you down to the ground. So for me, I was always really interested in the environment. I mean, my student project here was doing solar panels. My first job was designing solar panels, condensing gas boilers and stuff. And I was obviously interested in engineering and creativity. And I was also quite interested in the people stuff, because my grandfather had been quite eminent in that area. And I kind of looked for a course in the degree that would teach me how to manage people or something like that. But I think it was operational science was the only thing that was anywhere close, and that wasn't. So, you know, I started, you know, doing R&D, then I got into technical consultancy, which is a lovely way to transition gently from doing the technical projects to managing your projects, to beginning to sell, to beginning to negotiate contracts. It all happens gently and organically. And then there's a big crunch point when I took a bold step of joining the group that's lit out from PA Consultants, Pat Centre International, to set up TTP Group. And it does feel pretty silly borrowing a mortgage's worth in order to pay your salary, particularly 5 years later when you're thinking, actually, this really could go down the tubes. So it was a big gamble, but one of the things that made me decide that this was what I wanted to do was the people. And I knew these people would be ethical, they would be fun, and they would have a damn good go at setting up the sort of company that I'd want to be part of. And so I think that's the absolute key, the people, you know. And then we started with, you know, in what we called the rat hole. And so that was inflection number one. And inflection number two really was when I said I wanted to move on from doing technical consultancy. I got to one of those stages in my mid-40s when you just think, you know, if I design another piece of plastic, I will scream, even if I have to supervise somebody else designing another piece of plastic, and switched into doing the people stuff. And I set up the Creativity Partnership, which is a kind of business, and I was doing training and workshops and organisational change. But my clients are all techies, and they really like it, because suddenly there's a person doing this workshop stuff who understands techies, who understands how engineers think, other than these sort of happy, clappy, creativity facilitator types that absolutely don't cut it for normal R&D engineers, you know. So that was a lot of fun. But then, you know, finally, I've got doing more and more stuff to do with the transition to the low-carbon economy, which is one of these wonderful, exciting, creative industrial revolution, loads of sort of social change and politics involved in it too. So these sort of three strands of things I'm interested in have all come together. So to me, it's absolutely logically carved. It's a sort of curve like that. Somebody else might think it's that, but to me, it's a steady escalation.
Rebecca, as someone who's actually in the middle of that curve, sitting in TTP, does it feel like that, or is it completely different?
Yes.
No?
So, well, I joined GSK and I thought I'll start here and then I'll move into the next level, and then sort of gradual stepping up that everyone expects. But then I heard more about tech consultancy, and it sounded quite interesting. So I started talking to some people at TTP, and they were like, well, we have a flat structure, so things work slightly differently here. And when I started to find out a bit more about that, I thought, that sounds pretty cool. So now that I'm here, it is different. There are different challenges from when you have a manager and you get told what to do, and you have a team of people that know that they need to do the stuff that you tell them to. It's not always like that. But at TTP, I found it quite challenging initially because I've come in, I'm new, and I have to somehow form a team of people that want to work on my project. And so it's become a lot more about building relationships with people. So I think that, yeah, it's not what I originally expected when I graduated from university and thought, okay, well, I'll do this and then I'll move on to this. And then it's kind of, I've moved away from that completely to an organisation where there isn't that structure there in place, but you can still progress in other ways and almost lead your own development. So I'm in progress, enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. But I think, yeah, it's a good way to figure out what you enjoy and where you want to develop.
And how about you?
Leadership positions sort of evolved. I spent my whole career working at refineries and chemical plants, so I was always, in the production side. As a mechanical engineer in the petrochemical industry, I was on what was called the fixed equipment side, which is the opposite of the broken equipment side. It's actually the pressure envelope versus the machinery. To be able to evolve in that role, I got a good understanding of metallurgy as well as the mechanical aspects of the piping and pressure vessels, heat exchangers and so on. Always had to be in some sort of leadership role. Very early positions were like in maintenance engineering, and it sort of evolved as more into fixed equipment specialist. When I was in that, I was actually on some international panels on setting industry standards. Ones in particular were on brittle fracture and alternatives to asbestos for gaskets and other materials. Most supervisory leadership role I had was as a chief inspector at the Dartmouth refinery in Nova Scotia. It's actually since closed down. It's a very demanding job because the crude oil that we processed every day was actually very different. So, and it was cheap, and cheap means there's a lot of corrodants in it. So it's quite a challenging job to try and second guess where we should be inspecting before it found us. Very rewarding job. Nova Scotia's absolutely lovely place to live. Some of the nicest people you can choose to work with. After that, I evolved into project management, the whole various things. I actually drilled a well one time and so on, so I had quite a broad-based one. I think when you're developing your leadership style, there's very important basics to remember. Be a team player. You want to share with the team. You have to be a team player to be a reasonable leader. And you have to share the credit. Probably didn't invent most of the technology that you're managing, so someone was a team leader and shared that with you one day, so pass it on. I think the other people is recognising diversity, and it's all diversity. It's not just male, female, ethnic origin and so on. It's styles, introverts, extroverts. Really be aware of people's diversity and bring out the best of what they have to offer. Don't assume people are equal. We talk a lot about equality, but I like to use the word equity, because equality says we're all going to be treated the same. Equity is we're all going to be treated what's best for the diverse person we are. So as I say, I think it's something, even in university, whether you're in the university engineering or college engineering society, it's learn to be a team player, because a team player will make you a leader.
So I'd like to follow up a little bit about that. And specifically thinking about role models and mentors, certainly when you graduated, in fact, even when I graduated, women were a very small minority.
Yeah.
You couldn't look up an organisation and see someone who looked like you.
No.
So how did you set about finding people to learn from, in developing your own leadership style, in developing yourself as the team player, as the mentor that you wanted to be?
I don't think I realised it at the time, but I did allude to that training foreman at British Steel. Really was one of the best mentors I ever had. He taught me a heck of a lot. And when I entered my first job as BP Chemicals in South Wales, the now defunct Baglan Bay Works, they had a very formal programme under the Institution of Mechanical Engineers Monitored Professional Development Scheme. But it was a very good scheme because we had three or 4 months in each department. I was put in the design first because they didn't dare let me out on the field. They weren't quite sure what to expect. And at each stage you got moved around and you had an official mentor. But you also found mentorship. I remember very early on when I was first starting going out into the control rooms and meeting the guys in the field, one of the plant superintendents, one of the shift positions, took a bit of a shine for me. And if he was on days when I was there, he invited me over for a cup of tea as long as I took some chocolate digestives over. And he would chat and in his way, and you look back and, it'd be lovely to sort of revisit and meet, if he's still with us. He was providing me, he took me under his shell. He was going to help make me succeed in that chemical plant. And so if someone offers it, it's not necessarily the senior engineer. I say in this case it was the shift superintendent. In another case it was a shift foreman. I've had some fabulous mentorship from engineers, and I've actually had some rubbish mentorship from engineers too. I've also had rubbish mentorship from other people. I've probably paid it back in my way well and rubbish at the same time. And as I say, again, pay back as part of mentorship too. I mean, if you're mid-career and you're helping someone through, it's a real test on how you're doing. It's not one way by any. You learn an awful lot when you work with people half a generation behind you. And, I think it's, I think it's really those soft, in terms of formal skills is what makes or breaks. And last but not least, have a sense of humour. You need a good sense of humour.
Has that been very much your experience as well, or was it?
Well, I mean, for me, ever from Churchill on, I was always the most senior technical woman in the organisation that I worked in. And so there just wasn't a senior woman technical person to sort of guide and help. So you have to get your guidance and help and inspiration and everything else from the blokes. And there's an awful lot of things that are common, and there's some slightly sort of weird, mysterious things that aren't. But you just can get those. And I remember one word of advice when I think it was quite early in my career, and I was starting to learn this difficult process of how do you as a consultant go out and sell work, which is vital, as you know, but quite toe-curling when you start doing it. And one of the guys said, come out and do some sales trips with me, and then go and do some with so-and-so and some with so-and-so. Said, and work out whose style you like, what fits you as a person, because some of us won't. And said you might want to pick and choose, this bit from there. And that was such good advice. So I quite deliberately went out on sales trips with 3 or 4 of blokes, and I picked up different things from each of them, and then started to sort of invent my own style and stuff.
Has that been similar for you, or?
I think very similar in that when I joined Shell, there were very few senior women that you could look up to and say, well, I'm just going to follow in those footsteps. I think the thing that I would say is if you do go into industries where there aren't very many women, is to stick together with your compatriots and your colleagues. When I worked in West Africa, I found it quite isolating to be on your own, essentially, because I think there were don't know, less than 20 technical women, professional technical women working there. And so then when somebody says something to you, you think, did I hear that right? Did you just say what I think you said? Do you know? And actually, the way certainly big companies work, you go, no, I'm not going to make a fuss. And I think, so then you go away. Whereas if you can pick up the phone to somebody and say, he said that, and they go, no, that definitely wasn't right. Or, no, don't worry, you're overreacting. But it's a part of the validation, I think, to stick together. If there are no role models and people higher up, it's to stick with your compatriots and your cohorts. And we talked about inflection points a bit. I mean, I finished with Shell and came back and had a career break and became interested in STEM education in school. But for me, the big change was I met a mum at the school gate who was also a female engineer. What are the chances, huh?
Yeah.
So, you know, so she'd been to Durham and her best friend had done the same postgrad as me a year later, and, you know, all of a sudden, and then we've gone on together. So when it became, you know, well, what are we going to do? We quite like to work. We want to work on our terms. So I know this is a good idea. Let's go to the CEO of this charity that we're involved in and convince him that he needs to employ us. It was quite a talking about selling, it was quite a bolshy thing to do, because we literally just walked into his warehouse and said, we think you have a problem and we can solve it for you. And if you'd said to me at 20 that I would have done it, I would have said you are having a laugh. But really, we did do it. But it was part of there were two of us. And we, you know, when one looked as if they were flagging, the other one picked it up. And we came out, and it was the middle of the day, and we've got small children, so we didn't go to the pub. We went to a coffee shop and had a very large piece of cake, to be honest, and went, because he said yes, you know, and that's how we started. But it was having company, I would say, a wingman, as the boys would say.
How about you? Wingman, role model?
Yeah, a bit of everything, I think. When I was over, I had a similar experience when I was living in Japan, where I felt I was working with GSK, and the site that I worked on, there were no women, apart from, there were two women who were both based in HR. And so I was siphoned off into like this team with all men engineers who didn't want to speak to me. And it was really isolating. And so I did the same thing. I went in to the HR where the two women were, who were also scared to speak to me initially. And then they became my friends, looked out for me, introduced me to their families. And then that's how I started feeling like I wasn't completely alone in a country where I knew absolutely nothing. So I think definitely trying to find people who you can relate to. And it doesn't necessarily have to be another woman, I suppose, but I think for me in that case, that's the way it worked out. But I think another I suppose role models for me are also my peers. So in the Royal Academy of Engineering, there's a group of us who we are the engineering leadership scholars from a certain cohort, and we all support each other, and we're all, I think, well, I'm inspired by all of them. They're all in the same cohort as me, but they inspire me I see the new companies that they're starting, the new things that they're trying to do, and that sort of inspires me to keep exploring and finding out what else is out there. So I think, and obviously lecturers and people like that are also really great. I have one of my lecturers, she is my inspiration. When I was in Japan, she's one of the people that I called to say, I am so alone and I don't know how to work here. And she helped me through that. So I think all around you, not just the people, your lecturers, but also people in your own cohorts, I think, are good role models.
Super. So I'm going to pick up on something you just said. In a question that sounds like a cliche on a panel of women, I would ask men this question. Work-life balance. How's that been?
A challenge. I think I probably spanned the entire spectrum from working. I worked in the corporate head office for Shell, and in my building, the average number of hours being worked a week was 60. that was the average. That included all the administrative staff
God.
who were doing 35 because we were in Holland. And so, I mean, really, the building had a manned entrance and exit from 7 till 7. And then out of those hours, you had to go out another way. And it was always my ambition every day to go through the manned exit. And I made it about twice a week, I would say, and the rest of the time I was. So I have done the ludicrously silly hours, all the way through to, I've had enough of this, I'm stopping. You know, I have lived, and I had 5 years off with no work at all, and I've sort of stepped, and now I think I've got a balance that suits me. So I work part-time, I only work in the school term. I spend my holidays helping my mother with 500 pregnant sheep. You know, but I have many demands on my time, I think, and it's taken me until this age to work out how to balance them all. I think when I was in my 20s, I was young and enthusiastic, and if the boss said, stay and do this job, I went, yes, sir. Not quite so, but do you know what I mean? And it's taken quite a long time, I would say. It's something that comes with confidence. And to realise that the world won't end if you say no, or if you say, actually, I'd quite like to go home now. It does take confidence. Is that fair?
Yes, so for me, starting my career, I think I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, so I don't mind working the extra hours. I don't have something to rush home to. So I think if you're enjoying what you do, and you don't really have any other big ties, for me, it's easier for me to kind of let my work take over more than it should maybe. But at this stage, because I'm enjoying it so much, I'm just working away.
I remember feeling like that.
Yeah, me too.
How about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I really, emphasise that with Rebecca. Similarly, for the first probably 20 years, I mean, I worked far too hard, but because I was really enjoying it. I mean, I was given all these resources and toys in order to invent, which is what I most wanted to do, and I had opportunities to travel all sorts of interesting places. And my Swiss clients did realise that I tended to find that Mondays and Fridays were most convenient days for meetings in Switzerland. So, I mean, I played to the full those sort of work-life balance things that you can do. Know that game. In terms of sort of relationships, I met my husband in my 40s. And some might say, oh, well, I mean, there you were you. I mean, at one point it was you and 3,000 blokes. I mean, weren't any of them okay, And, I mean, something is my stuff. But I think there was something about, in a sense, I'm an introvert inside. The idea of having a relationship with one of my male colleagues, I just couldn't stand the thought of that. So actually, all those guys were off limits, And that kind of, and seeing I was spending most of my time at work, that was actually sort of like most everybody, really. So anyhow, things loosened up in my mid-40s, and I met my husband, and we got married, and he came pre-equipped with 2 kids, actually 5 kids. 3 of them were goats, and one of them was an 18-year-old boy, and there was a 21-year-old woman, Amy and Milo. And they've subsequently produced grandchildren. So I've had this wonderful treat of, I've got grandchildren, and I have never had to change a nappy.
Kudos. I think we found a role model.
Actually, I'm any second or minute or day now I'm going to be a grandmother for the first time. So I'm just... I don't think there's a new message there. Again, first to be first. When I had my first daughter in 1986, I went back. Back then, I was allowed, you were guaranteed 4 months leave, and you could stretch it to 6 with managerial permissions. I went back, and my managers welcomed me back. And it actually had a huge downsizing while I was away. We knew you'd come back after 1, but we know if you have another, well, you'll stay away. I said, I'm not going to spend the next 2 years you watching my midriff. I said, if I'm having another and I'm enjoying my career, I'm coming back. And I did come back and invented a new type of leave. Instead of taking the full leave and coming back full time, I actually took a shorter full-time leave and then worked part-time for a while. And it got copied quite a lot because, you know, I'm able to spend time with the toddler and evolve and everything. So, again, pioneered maternity leave in my part of the petrochemical industry. Big thing by balance by far, I think first you have to define your own success. I bet you everyone in this room was in the top 5 to 10% in their class at school. And when you're in that type of environment, your success is sort of assuming you're going up some form of pyramid. And that's not necessarily true. I think your success is balancing what you want to do with what you actually believe. I mean, I think your life is a mixture of your career, your family, your friends, your hobbies, and what I'm going to call spirituality, which might mean volunteering with people, it might mean religion, it might be... And you know what that balance is for you. Don't let anyone define it for you. You define your own. I mean, if you have a very high work ratio in that, you're going to welcome high, because that's what drives you, that's what makes you happy. But if you want to balance that off with family, hobbies, whatever, you know, sports and so on, then you have to really say, I'm going to manage my career for that balance. I mean, like I described earlier, as chief inspector at refinery, that's probably the most hours demanding job ever, because you get called in the middle of the night when something starts leaking, and frequently, and you know, I put my time in at that, but then went into project management, which is a lot more manageable in terms of 8 to 5 or whatever. Also be very flexible, because if you're very flexible, they might be flexible back. I was on a major shutdown in 1988, and I swear my second daughter was conceived that night that the unit started at. And I actually brought that up a little later, and the manager said, yes, good, you understand flexibility, it works both ways. You know, I mean, can't always plan things like that, but I say by far, manage your own success. Don't tell you, don't get someone else telling you what success means. Not everyone's going to be a CEO of a major corporation. Not many people are going to be very happy being a CEO of a major corporation too, unless that's what drives them. And I think that balance is, you know, what's driven me for my life. And I've certainly enjoyed my career. I could tell an awful lot of stories about it. And I remember thinking when I chose to have children back in the 80s, I said, my 2 goals in life is to have a good relationship with my children, but not be bored to death having that. You know, I couldn't have stayed at home. And I did make choices in the life, putting them first. Like I retired slightly early because the alternative was being when my one daughter had just started university in southwest Ontario, and there's still the other one was in high school, being transferred to Calgary. That would have been absolutely devastating for them. So you make those choices in life. And just to top it off, I say reevaluate that every 5 or 6 years or so, what you think the balance you want in your life really is. I think, you know, that way I think you maximise your ability to be happy in what you're doing.
Fantastic, thank you. So you've generously let me ask all the questions so far, and I'm conscious I'm hogging the floor. So what would you really like to know? Have we got any questions from the audience? I'm just going to let a woman go first, because it is our day, and it is about us. Yeah. I'm not ignoring you. Yes.
Do you think that if the term engineer was ditched, it would encourage women more? I think it should be called something like creative science. And I noticed a lot of the panel have talked about creativity, and that's what attracted them to it. Engineer, it reminds people of
engines.
For all my career in both the UK and Canada, the engineer is, you know, through the professional institutions, it's like the word engineering has been sort of taken away from us. Like Britain's favourite engineer was Kevin Webster on Coronation Street or whatever, and you know, I mean, and it's that. You know, not many people misuse the word doctor or lawyer, but engineer you know, is the guy who comes and fixes your washing machine or whatever, and I think that, and so they try professional engineer and chartered engineer, and then people think that sounds pompous, and I think you've got a good point on that.
Yeah. Actually, I really like your point, because of course engineer, if you think about it, it's from engine, and I've had a little ding dong with the engineering department about this actually, because people try to draw women into engineering, and they do it in a way that's just by blokes designed to attract blokes. So
Absolutely.
the engineering department's magazine, I think it was a year ago, there was a nice page about Athena Swan and and how they were attracting women engineers, and all the product examples that were given. I use the word "all" in an engineering approximity sort of sense of way. Were about ways of propelling cars faster, or space travel, or this or that or the other. I'm thinking. But they managed, and they illustrated it with a picture of a young girl in goggles, wrapped up in lots of safety gear, doing something mysterious on a bench. I'm thinking that might be a way to attract a young boy, and so you just replacing a girl, the image of a boy with an image of a girl doesn't cut it. Neither does putting a pink border around.
No.
They didn't do that. So I mean, with my career, I was not interested in cars. I remain deeply disinterested in cars. It's very embarrassing when something goes wrong. But I always used to say, I was interested in products that people used. I used to say intimately, and then I started developing contraceptives and things. So, and I invented the machine that made the Femidom, and various things like that. But medical products, power tools, and it's all about how you use them. And human factors stuff. Yeah. And a lot of women are in those sort of areas, which, as you say, it's creative science, but it involves an understanding of what does somebody actually want to do and how can you make it really nice to do.
I think we need to do a lot better at making the range of possibilities from a sort of scientific, logical way of approaching problems open to people. I think we need to make all these things. I'm personally not so hung up on the should it be an engineer or should it be a creative thinker. I think, there are lots of surveys that tell you that every time there's a picture in the press of an engineer, it will inevitably be a female in a hard hat.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah? Something like 85% of the references to an engineer are accompanied by this picture. So there's so many strings to it. There's media and the way we're presented in the media. There's the way we talk to children about it. I met a young girl in a UTC in the East End of London, and she was on a team that built a car. But she was doing it because she recognised that actually it wasn't about building the car. It was about problem solving, it was about working with a team, it was about do, improve, that cycle. Yeah. And what she wanted to do, she wanted to work for Shelterbox.
Yes.
Yeah, so the people who do the emergency things. So that's what, and she was able to see that, but I think she was quite rare, and we don't do a good enough job of making all those possibilities available to children. And we think, I was at my son's parents' evening on Tuesday, sitting outside the chemistry lab, waiting for the teacher, and I'm looking at a big notice board, and it says, you can have an exciting career in chemistry. I mean, that's an illustration. Even I was bored, and it's my job, right? It's my job to think, how can we encourage more people? And I read this thing and I went, oh. Do you know, it was dry, it was, oh yes, you can do this, and then look how your career progresses. Careers don't progress like that. They're full of inflections. And if you teach children that it's quite linear, and this is the ladder that you climb, then they become very uninterested in it.
Boring.
Yeah, and I think the range of things that, so I'm not necessarily caught up in the name itself, but actually letting children know the range. So saying, to make an ice cream you need an acoustics engineer. Like, that's cool. Or like if you talk them through their day, you brush your teeth, a toothbrush.
Yes.
You jump on the bus, but when you're playing Angry Birds or whatever the cool app is, all of this is engineering, and I think just describing that and saying it's not just the car it's not just the engine. I think it's the message that you know, engineers are involved in everything, so how can you not be interested? That's how I see it.
Dr. Bill Lucas, who's at the University of Winchester, he wrote something that said, all young children are naturally engineers.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And that what we have to do is nurture that and grow it and not beat it out of them by, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. You know, not constrain it by saying, and this is how you do this and this is the right answer. It's about exploring how to solve problems, and you could do it this way or you could do it that way, but it's that sort of approach rather than putting them into little boxes.
But I think it's not even just children, actually, when I'm just thinking about it, because so when I worked at GSK, I did medical device design, and people within the company would say, well, why do we need an engineer to make a medical device? Because it's drugs, so do you not need, I don't know, chemists or pharmacists? And I was like, no, the medical device is designed by engineers. So I think it's broadly across from children all the way through. It's about what is an engineer, I think.
I think we also have to do a better job of supporting each other. Like, engineers can be very reticent about their profession. I mean, we don't get many TV shows all about us, like lawyers and policemen and people do. But I don't think we actually do support each other that well. I mean, particularly across the field. You know, I mean, maybe we need to learn to cheerlead a little bit more about ourselves. You know, like, you say you do some engineering and I don't even understand, what you're doing, but say, good for you. You know, I think, because that's catching.
What else is on your minds? What else would you like to know? I will let you
allowed to ask a question?
I think the question I was going to ask will probably elicit comments very similar to the ones that we've just heard in response to the previous question, so I'll cede the floor to anybody else.
I have more questions if you don't. Yes, please.
What's special about launching from engineering at Churchill into what you've done? What does engineering at Churchill give you that you wouldn't get having done something similar somewhere else?
Oh, what a good question.
Yeah. I think Churchill by charter, because Isabel and I were in the same year. We haven't seen each other for 40 odd years, but Churchill by charter, certainly back then, had a very strong need to get engineers, science, medicine, vets, maths into Cambridge by charter. Also, from state schools across the walks of life, create opportunities for more people to get into it. And I think those two combined made Churchill quite stand out. I mean, I know me and some of my friends, we used to call us, hey, we go to Mattingly Road Tech, which people from rather elitist public schools didn't quite appreciate, back in the day. I don't know about what it's like nowadays, but it did have that comfort or whatever, where you belonged. It wasn't, there's nothing to do with status, there's nothing to do with where you came from, what your parents did or whatever. You were there because you'd done pretty well at your A-levels or your entrance exam, and you came and you belonged. And I think that gave you a confidence going into whatever the next level was.
I mean, I think it was being at Churchill that helped me get, it was really a really important part of me getting a good degree. I got first, which then let me, in those days, more or less have my pick of what I wanted to do job-wise, which was, what better start can you get? And it was partly of course, we had really good, tutors and directors of studies and all the rest of it. And partly it was the culture which really fitted with me. I do remember being pretty shocked. Francesca, was that one of those friends of yours I went to some party with him, and then we went back, and he was at Magdalen.
If he was at Magdalen, he wasn't a friend of mine.
I know, or maybe he was a friend of one of yours. But I do remember with horror realising, this was an undergraduate who wore tweeds. And he kept a horse somewhere outside Cambridge. And I remember thinking, I'm very glad I'm not at Magdalen, but of course I couldn't have been.
But let women
No,
in.
but I couldn't have been, so I was safe. But
I think he was sent down with minus 99%, that guy, in his first year, because he never showed up. And he used to get deducted marks if you didn't do your lab work properly. Because there was certainly one in our year, wasn't there, Isabel? Sir Baronet somebody or other who never showed up, but it's pretty convenient for Newmarket to his horses. Yes.
I'll say the other thing I really liked about Cambridge was that the diversity of the engineering degree, because I thought I wanted to be a civil engineer when I arrived, and it took 2 weeks of structures lectures to make me realise that I didn't. I was much more interested in mechanical stuff, things that move, much more fun. But also there's just a sheer diversity of other societies and stuff in Cambridge. I mean, I had this sort of rigorous schedule of all these different lunches I would be going to in between lectures and labs in the engineering department. So I used Cambridge to the full.
How about you?
I can only reiterate what Janet and Anna said. I found it a very sort of down-to-earth place, and that meant a great deal to me. I came from a state comprehensive background in South Wales, so I didn't want to go to the sort of very tweedy places of Magdalen. So to me, it gave me confidence that I could come here on my own terms, as it were, in a place I felt comfortable and still compete, though I didn't get first.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I didn't
come.
No, I didn't come here. I studied at Queen's University Belfast and Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg. And I think for me, the diversity in both those locations, more so in Sweden, really sort of taught me a lot and opened my eyes.
Any more questions? What else do you really want to know? Actually, I'll ask what you really want to know over dinner. I know that's how it works. What's on your minds now? Charlotte?
How do you think for somebody starting out in their career nowadays, it's changed from when you were starting out in your careers?
Big time. When we started out, there was a very high probability you'd retire from the company you started out, which is probably practically impossible. And also, there was a reasonable chance you might make it to mid-career with the skills and knowledge you had when you developed as you started out, which is practically impossible these days too. I mean, I absolutely applaud your generation for being able to take on this world of rapid change. I mean, change has just accelerated so much over the last couple of generations that, I mean, it's just phenomenal and I guess the only thing you can say in retrospect, if I was in your position, really have to say what skills should I develop that might still be valuable in 5 or 6 or 10 years' time. So you have to say, if I really become an expert at this, what's the chance of a robot's going to be an even better expert than me in how many times? So really focus on what you think sustainable skills are going to look like. I mean, there's the people skills. I mean, they probably don't change much in time. I mean, getting on with people, but certainly the technical skills is, I mean, I'm sure some of my technical ability is pretty obsolete by now. And the rate of that change is going to be phenomenal for you folks. But, I mean, it could be very exciting as well.
I mean, for me, I'm kind of sort of... I left Churchill with no debt. You'd be a lucky student to be in that position or have, generous, rich parents or whatever. I was able to get paid interesting, relevant work every holiday that I wanted it. That helped, obviously, with the first point. And then when I graduated, I had a choice of interesting jobs to go to. I had the most... I turned down a job offer from Mars, as in Mars Bars. And I was so irritated at the time with the way one of my friends was getting all these patronising job letters, which said, "Thank you, Mr. Bogle, for your interest shown in our company. We regret that we do not have an application, a vacancy suitable for a man of your capabilities, and wish you every luck in finding a suitable appointment." He was sticking those up all down one of the staircases over there. And so when I decided very clearly that I didn't want to work in Slough, I was never, ever going to want to work for the Mars Group. They sent me this job offer. and I sent them a letter. And I had a really nice job that I wanted to do in R&D in a Tube Investments Research Lab at what's now the Genome Campus of Hingston. So I wrote them a letter saying, "Dear Mr. Mars," whatever it was, "thank you very much for offering a job with your company. I regret, however, that I'm unable to take your post. I wish you every luck in finding a suitable applicant."
Yeah, so don't do that.
Well, no, do. It's worth doing the other. But be very, very clear that you will never, ever want to work for that group again.
But that predates land systems and computers and the internet when she was able to do that.
Yeah,
you wouldn't get away with that these days.
Very polite.
There'd be a permanent record.
Yeah, but I knew there would probably be a permanent record.
But if someone shredded your answer,
I had that opportunity because I had, I had several. I mean, I can't quite remember how many were, but as a Cambridge graduate in engineering with a reasonable degree, anything above a fail, you were going to get a variety of job offers, and I gather that's a bit different. Yeah. But on the other hand, it's still your oyster, and actually, we were kind of expecting to work in sort of the UK. I mean, I wasn't expecting to work for the same company all my life. I mean, because I got bored. I knew I would have, So that obviously that was available if you wanted it, but I didn't. But I mean, you would have opportunities to go and work in Germany or in States or in Japan or whatever. The world is more global than it was, so that gives you more fun. And for that, I'm envious.
Well, as somebody who had, that's what I did. Yeah, I think I'm not sure I'm sort of speaking, but when I graduated, it was quite structured. So I joined Shell, and there was a scheme, and we all sort of progressed. Or I joined Rolls-Royce, and we all went round the lathes together. And I think now it is more up to you to decide what you want, and go out and get it. The sort of formal programs aren't quite so structured, which is a good thing and a bad thing. I learned lots of good things from mine, but it was quite, linear. This is where you're going. Some things don't change, though. As Janet says, people skills, whatever job you will do in whatever sector, you will have to work in teams, and you will have to jointly solve problems. You'll have to get on with other people. And things like, teamwork, communication, problem solving, that goes across all careers. And I'm still using those skills that I learned back when I was 20, designing a gas compressor in Nigeria. That is still what I use day to day to try and persuade somebody to give us loads more money.
So I think a lot of it is about what interests you and seeing, what's out there, and things might be the same, they might not. But I think that you need to understand what the trends are in the industry that you're interested in, just general macro trends. So things like, for me, in healthcare, personalised healthcare, increase in informatics and data, healthcare moving towards the home, and just understanding what these key trends are and seeing the balance of what do I want to do, but what actually matters and what is happening, and trying to sort of see where you might fit in that and look forward. Don't just think about it right now. So that's probably what I would say.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we need to get from here to dinner in a time frame that suits the catering staff as well as us. I'd like to thank our panel. That's been fantastic. I really appreciate your candour and your insight and your generosity in sharing your perspectives. They're coming to dinner with us, so we'll all have a chance to chat a little bit more after that. But thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Charlotte and to Dame Matheny for getting us up and running, and to our many friends like Malcolm and Tim and the gang. Without him, this would not have come together. So huge thanks to the panel and to everyone else.
Thank you.